Okay, what's up, everyone? How we doing? Friday, August 30th. Here we are on YouTube Live. If you're joining me here live, thank you so much for tuning in live, you guys. If you're watching the replay, thank you for watching the replay. If you guys are a fan, if you enjoy what I have to say, I would love it for you guys to like this video, comment on this video, to subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing these lives every Monday and Friday, 12 p.m. PST, as well as I'm just going to be posting a lot of other content just on my YouTube, educational videos. I'm going to get into other comedy content that I used to do at some point here. But for now, there's going to be a lot of educational content that's being posted in these YouTube live streams where I'm just going to jam for 30, 40, 50, 60 minutes on a different topic. And eventually I want to be able to have these as more discussions, interaction as my channel grows. So if you guys are watching this live, I would love to hear where you guys are tuning in from, where you're watching this live stream from. Let me know where you're hollering from. And yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. So today, we're going to talk about the trauma of procrastination. We're going to talk about the paralyzation of inaction. You know, we have a big vision for our life. We have all these dreams that we want to do. We have all these things that we want to accomplish, but we can't get off the couch. We can't, we keep distracting ourselves. YouTube videos, potato chip habits is what I call them. We're not able to really engage with what it is that we really want in this life, right? And I think the absolute thing that wears at us the most is when we don't feel like we're making progress in our life. When we feel stuck, when we feel stagnant, when we feel in limbo, when we don't feel we're moving the needle forward in the direction that we want. We don't even have to be fucking have all our dreams come true in that moment. But if we're feeling like, oh, there's progress, like I really feel progress is happening towards what I tangibly want to create in the world, then we feel so much joy. We feel so much radiance when we're like, I want to create this, and you feel yourself taking action, and you feel yourself executing, and you feel yourself moving the needle or the nozzle forward in your life. All of a sudden starts to build up some momentum. You have all those sort of feel good feelings happening. You have this deep sense of fulfillment. You're more inspired and empowered in your own vessel. Things like shame and guilt seem to sort of dissipate and kind of come down. Just your self-image just improves, right? Just when you find yourself executing on what you want, even if it's not like massive progress, but we're just moving the needle forward. We're like, oh shit. And that's where momentum is built. And we always build momentum in either direction. You know what I mean? When we kind of get into this spiral of, say, bad habits or procrastination, that kind of builds momentum and it creates life, and we build more attention to it. And so whatever we draw our attention to is going to kind of build energy and build life. And so when we start to build momentum of like actually executing on what we want, like we start moving, right? And then we start to understand of like, oh shit, this is how it happens. And that can go to the negative aspects in our life or the positive, right? And so it's so much of it is about how do we build momentum, right? How do we build momentum? And we just want to exist in a space of just progress. We want to be able to tangibly, energetically feel progress. That's a life force energy that builds momentum and builds that fire and improves our self-image. All of a sudden we're like staring into the mirror, and we're like a little more proud of what is looking back at us. Or we want to be more social. We want to be around other people because we feel good about what's happening internally. We feel good about what's happening in our life, right? And so often when we get off track or in patterns of self-destruction or self-sabotage, then that just like the shame and the guilt just builds in our body, and we get further off track. And that's going to build more life to things like inaction, procrastination, not being able to apply ourselves to what we want. And so one thing I wanted to kind of start this whole jam here with the trauma procrastination, because people are always like, just do it. Like, why are you procrastinating? You just got to fucking do it. Right. But there's so much energetics and trauma behind why we procrastinate. And so this live is going to be about me exploring a lot of the subtleties and nuances of what's really happening from like a trauma perspective, as well as an energetic perspective. And there's a bunch of things that I wrote down that I'm going to kind of jam and go through, to kind of bring this picture to life. And so the place that I wanted to start was actually with Dr. Andrew Huberman. I don't know how to pronounce his name exactly, but he was talking about, well, first off, Dr. Andrew Huberman says this piece that I really, really love, where he's like, be very weary of things that make you feel good really, really quickly. And it was like, it was on his podcast, I think, that he said that. And that really, really stuck with me. And that really relates to what we're talking about here and kind of how I want to enter this space sort of delayed gratification. And so if you think about it, think about things that bring you joy really quickly. It's like drugs, alcohol, it's like watching something that's entertaining on TV, things like sex or sexual pleasure. Like these things make us feel good really, really quickly, right? And if we think about our life, how much of maybe the joy, fulfillment, happiness in our life is really made up of things that are there to serve us, to make us feel good really, really quickly. I kind of relate it to, it's pleasure seeking versus peace seeking, right? So pleasure seeking would be like what we call like a potato chip habit. It would be like what Dr. Andrew Huberman says, be weary of things that make you feel good really quickly. It's a lot of addiction, right? Things with addiction, like, and so think about your life and how much of the fulfillment is from kind of the instant hits. This is where we get a lot of like people going dopamine detoxes, because we're trying to rewire the brain and we're trying to rewire our system to learn sort of a different like reward system, right? Because it's all about the reward system, right? With procrastination and all these different things. So we talk about delayed gratification. Beware of things that make you feel good really quickly. So first off, just take a look at your life, maybe even just how you construct your days and where you pull your joy and fulfillment from. And we want to really create a life, and where a life of real meaning and fulfillment is going to be developed is in the process of deep fulfillment in how we move through our days, our weeks, our months, and our years. Like our reward system that we've established in our life, in our body, and where where sort of our brain and our body pulls rewards from, pulls sort of fulfillment, joy, satisfaction from. We have to look, is that like instant gratification or delayed gratification, right? So instant, and food's another big one for instant gratification. And we have to really look, where are we pulling our pleasure and our fulfillment from, right? Is it like an instant reward system, or is it a delayed gratification reward system? Because so much of like why people steep into instant gratification is because they just lack that deeper fulfillment. Either we don't know where to put that, or we struggle with that process, right? And so basically, when we say that we procrastinate, ultimately what it means is we struggle with a delayed reward system, that our brain, our mind, our body struggles with the idea of a delayed reward system. And so that's kind of where procrastination sort of begins. We struggle with a delayed reward system. So that's where I'm going to kind of move into sort of in jam and sort of explore just the nuances of what this is. And the first piece that we can kind of move into this is very simple. It's just habit. It's just habit. You can actually shift this. I forget the whole thing of how many days. What is it? 21 days to change a habit. But you can change that pattern really, really quickly. Like, for example, say like your instant gratification reward system is a lot with food. A really effective way to disrupt that is to move through intermittent fasting. I found that's a really, really proactive way where you learn to, because you kind of are going through this fasting for periods of the day, you learn to not derive your pleasure from food. And you actually learn to use food more as fuel rather than deriving pleasure from food. And I really learned through intermittent fasting, just for myself, of not deriving that hit from food and having to put it in other areas. And so just for an example, like that can shift really quickly. Like that shifted under a month for me, or I was like, oh, like I'm really not pulling that instant reward system from food that I had before, right? So you can shift it really quickly. So it's all about just habits and patterns, right? So much of why we struggle with procrastination is because we've gotten in the habit of an instant reward system, right? Just like think of people who like sit there and they just like smoke weed all night, or they drink all night, right? We're really in this place where we're deriving, it's just an instant reward system. Like this makes me feel good really quickly. Ultimately, it's deterring and distracting you from a greater sense of accomplishment that is trying to come through in your life, right? And so David Goggins actually uses this word, limbic friction. So this word limbic friction, because think about, and you guys listening, you may or may not know David Goggins. I'm sure you guys probably do. I'm a fan, not a fan, because I would never want to like live that way, but it's also motivating, and there's lots of great nuggets you can pull from him. There's like shades and colors I kind of pull from him. But if you think about a guy like David Goggins, think about it. He's like, I'm going to go run 20 miles, and it's like instant action. He's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. He's not in kind of the humming, the hawing, the, oh my God, I got to do this. Think about like in the evening, you're like, I need to do this work, and you're kind of dreading it. You're thinking about it. You're thinking about it. What that really is limbic friction. And so it might have actually been Dr. Andrew Huberman that created this term when he described David Goggins, why David Goggins can do what he does. But basically what it means is that you're able to move into a space of being able to exist in a lot of challenge, right? A lot of difficulty. It's kind of like your capacity to do hard things, your resilience in your body and your system is really, really expansive. It's kind of like, think of like an elastic band, right? You're able to like really sort of like expand and do really, really difficult things. And so like a guy like David Goggins, and the big thing I would say is habit, right? So think about a guy like David Goggins, and I think David Goggins actually said this, that you have to get up every day and earn it, right? Think about someone who's in recovery for addiction. Every single day they have to earn it, right? They have to earn it. So there's so much of like habit and pattern enforcement. And so, if we're in recovery or something, every single day is a new day, right? Where we're having to kind of do whatever the steps, we're having to apply those steps so that we don't relapse, right? The same thing is with how do we move against procrastination from a habit point of view, is that we have to really put ourselves in the constant process of doing difficult things that expands limbic friction, because David Goggins and Dr. Andrew Huberman talk about how it goes away really quickly. So the thing about developing this reward system for delayed gratification, we can move into that container really quickly, but it can contract back into instant gratification really, really quickly. Think about how you're like, even just your health, you're doing things for your health, you're on track. And then think about how quickly you can get back into the instant reward system. And so it's something that we really have to earn every day. And it's not something we're going to be like, oh, I'm good, right? So with delayed gratification, it really, really is something that we can develop quickly, but we can lose it quickly as well. So we have to earn it and reestablish it constantly. And that's why we really need to put ourselves in situations where we're having to move outside of our comfort zone, where we're having to meet our edge, where we're having to, another piece, and this is from Stephen Pressfield's book, The War of Art. And in the book, he talks about that we want to meet challenges. He was relating this to being a writer or being an artist, but we want to do challenges that perfectly. So it's where skill and challenge intersect, right? Where skill and challenge intersect. So when you think about where your skill, so it means you're doing something that you're good at, right? Think about it. You're like a writer and you're working on a really challenging process. You're good at this thing, and the challenge that you have in front of you is perfectly orchestrated in a way that is combined with your skill set and your talent. So your talent and your skill have perfectly moved to the synchronistic sort of pivot point of challenge. And so we need to really ask ourselves, what is like an available challenge to me right now? What is an available challenge? And so much of that is where really this idea of delayed gratification is going to be built, of this idea of limbic friction. And eventually what's going to happen as we develop that, we're going to get to a point where it's like you have to do something and you don't hum and haw, you just go do it, right? This is something that is drastically shifted inside of me, which is really changing my life, which is because I was someone just so struggled with procrastination, so struggled with being paralyzed in inaction, wasn't able to move forward with the things that you want, right? So when you develop this pattern and this habit where your skill set, your talent intersects with the challenge that's in front of you, and you develop sort of the limbic friction, you develop the capacity to do that, then all of a sudden your life is really going to start to build up momentum, right? You think about how you heal this procrastination, then you start to actually really build momentum to reorienting your self-image as someone who gets shit done. You can reorient and reestablish your self-image from someone being a procrastinator that struggles to do things, struggles to complete things, to someone who just gets shit done and works their ass off really, really quickly, to the point where when, as I said, like you have to do things that maybe in the past you would have so much dread about doing. You're like, this is going to be hard. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, that you just jump in. You just jump in. You're like, let's go. Right. And think about the amount of energy that we exercise in the resistance to doing things, right? How much energy that we exercise. And now what's happening is you're conserving all your energy for momentum in your life. So you're no longer kind of humming and hawing and having resistance to things. You're dropping into things, and your life is really drastically and dramatically moving forward in a direction that you want. And your self-image is changing really, really quickly. And so this idea of a delayed gratification reward system, right? So first off, just take stock of your life and look at where you're pulling your rewards from. Like, where do you pull reward from? They call this type 2 happiness and type 2 joy, which is, for example, like I love to get tattoos. Like getting tattoos is actually it is an instant gratification, but it's also a delayed gratification because you have to go through this pain. You have to go through this process to get this reward of this tattoo. And it doesn't feel good to get tattooed. It really doesn't feel good to get tattooed, but the process is kind of rewarding because what you get at the end. So that's like a kind of a microcosm of this experience. So where in your life do you pull your rewards from? Are you someone where it's like all about, the pleasure of food, or it's all about, that whiskey that I get to have at night, or that fucking, that joint that I get to smoke? Or is it about just that TV show that I'm sort of hooked on? Like, where is your pleasure and reward coming from on a daily basis? And if our life is amounting to all these potato chip habits, these really quick things, what's going to happen is we're going to look 3 or 4 years is going to pass, and we're going to be like, oh shit, nothing's really changed. I'm still kind of where I am. And then now that builds momentum. We start to see ourselves as someone who doesn't take action, someone who doesn't get shit done, someone who struggles with procrastination. This builds up momentum as a self-image. And now it's like we're in shackles. Now it's luminous. Now the amount of shame that our body's holding is massive. We want to isolate. We don't want to be around people. And people construct lifetimes of being on this constant downslide. So we just need to look where we pull our rewards from. We have to learn to develop a delayed reward system through limbic friction, which is where our skills and our talents intersect with the challenge in front of us. This is something that we have to earn every single day. We can develop a delayed reward system really fast, but we can lose it really fast. So it's a double-edged sword. The great thing is you can be in one place, and then 3 weeks can pass. You're like, oh my God, I feel so much better about myself. Maybe nothing massive externally has shifted necessarily, but internally, how you're identifying with yourself, how you're relating to yourself changes. And so much of that is the reward system. I always say you guys, delayed gratification is the energetics of God, right? So you think about instant gratification, it's you're giving into hedonist sort of behavior. You're giving into the guilt and shame, right? Really, so much of instant gratification is, yes, sometimes we go for food and we're like, I'm going to give myself this pleasure, and we feel good really quickly, and that's great, right? We want to have instant gratification, instant pleasure in our life. But when the whole spectrum of where we're pulling our rewards, our self-fulfillment from, then that's going to equate to a life where we underachieve, where we don't fulfill our dreams, where we have a lot of regret. We have, we just feel we never capitalized on our potential, right? So it's something we really, really have to take stock with. And delayed gratification, you're in the energetics of source and God. It's really like you're exchanging with God when you're doing this delayed gratification. You're moving into this sort of deeper sense of fulfillment, right? This deeper sense of fulfillment, and you're exchanging. And so much of being within the energetics of God is when we're orchestrating a life that is a delayed reward system. Because when we're really living in a delayed reward system, we're actually really giving and bestowing our gifts to the world. We're really being of service with our energy, what we're here to build and what we're here to create. So if you think about it, we're sabotaging and abandoning our responsibility to God, the divine, when we live in these instant reward system. It means that the universe, God, everything is not going to be able to receive the unique energetic imprint, the full potential of what we're capable of, right? Because we're in this, quick hits, pleasure, ecstasy, I want it quick, and we never fully realize our potential. And so procrastination is a big reason how we sabotage our power, right? It's a big reason how we sabotage our power. And why do we sabotage our power? Well, the biggest one is we're actually afraid potentially of how powerful that we are. If I were to fully engage and move into like a delayed reward system, we know that we would fully move into our light. We would fully move into our power. And what would happen when we move into our power? And so there's three things that we do to sabotage. And this relates to procrastination. So one is fear that we're fundamentally flawed, right? So think about it. If we're fundamentally flawed, of course we're going to procrastinate. Of course we're not going to move into a delayed reward system of things that are really meaningful to us, because we think there's something wrong with us. We think we're incomplete. We haven't been developed properly, whatever. Number two is fear of being abandoned, right? If I move into my power, my family will retract their love. My friend circle won't want to hang out with me. I'll be too much, right? So fear of being abandoned, fear of being excommunicated from the community, right? From the culture. Number three, which is the most common, is fear of outshining others, right? So if we move into a delayed reward system, if we stop procrastinating, you're going to move into your light. You're going to move into your power. People are going to have to feel your light, your radiance, your magnetism. And say we're someone who feels that we have a lot of gifts, we have a lot to offer, we have a lot of power, we have a lot of energy that's wanting to be put out into the world. Procrastination is a way we trap that energy. It's a way that we dilute that energy. It's a way that we filter it down, just by not realizing our potential, by not allowing the complete totality of our power to exist in the world. So we're afraid of outshining other people, right? And you guys, the most common way, or the most common dynamic, is sibling to sibling relationships, brother to brother, sister to sister, sister to brother, brother to sister. This is the most common way that we are afraid of outshining, right? Say that we, because siblings are raised in, and they have completely different experiences in the family of origin. Even though we come from the same parents, right? Come from the same home, we have completely different experiences. And so fear of outshining is the most common way through the work that I've done, that I've learned, that we sabotage our power. And so think about it. Procrastination is like a very surface microcosm of self-sabotaging our power, right? And if we think about why do we self-sabotage our power, again, fear of being abandoned, fear that we're fundamentally flawed, and fear of outshining, right? And so we procrastinate to sabotage our power because we're afraid of one of those things, right? Because if you move into your power, then people are going to have to feel that impact, right? And so what better way to self-sabotage by staying addicted to food, right? To, okay, I'm just going to be addicted to food, put on a bunch of weight, not feel good about myself, not be able to move into my radiance, which now, if I'm relating to food in this way, that's going to trickle down into other areas of my life where I'm not going to be able to execute and move towards those things because I've built up this habit and this pattern, momentum of shame in my body through my relationship with food. And now at the core of that, we're doing it because we fear that the light, the power that we hold, if we were to live in a really positive, self-reaffirming self-image of who we are, that it would outshine other people and other people wouldn't be around us and that we wouldn't be loved. We wouldn't, no one, we'd be alone, we'd be isolated, whatever, right? It kind of trickles down as sort of this trauma sort of spiral. And so we're afraid of outshining others. And so now, and I'm going to go back to some earlier childhood things in a bit, but I'm just kind of rolling with where we're going with this. And so, okay, so fear of outshining others, sabotage our power. We have to ask ourselves, why are we sabotaging our power, right? Why are we sabotaging our power? And so, and I made a video about this, we fear being seen and being exposed, right? If all of a sudden we're no longer procrastinating, means our life is moving forward in the direction that we want, means the universe is getting more of our energy, which means now we're going to be front and center. We're no longer going to be like grayed and dimmed and diluted in the background like a sheep. We're going to be front and center on our own island, creating a distinct life that means something to us, which means other people are going to see us, right? We're going to be exposed. And so when we don't have the nervous system capacity for exposure, and our system, a very convenient way is living through not completing things, struggling to take action, not being able to execute, and having so much resistance in our life and our body, right? Having so much resistance, right? Because we know that if we weren't to procrastinate all of a sudden, then maybe we would fucking write a book, or maybe we would build this business that required me to express myself and put myself out there more. Whatever it might be, not procrastinating would equate to being seen, right? And so when we really early on in childhood, in life, weren't seen, right? We weren't seen. We didn't feel chosen. We didn't feel that we were understood or heard, or that we had a voice, or that our expression was able to be fostered. Then when it comes to doing things in our life that are actually like soul driven, you know what I mean? Maybe we're someone who learned like hard work. And so we're good at, we don't procrastinate on things that don't have that are personally disconnected from us. But what happens when we do things where it's soul driven and it's really meaningful to our spirit, we really procrastinate and have a lot of resistance because that wasn't fostered, right? And so fear of being seen and fear of exposure, right? I'm going to be in the wide open. What is everyone going to think about me, right? And so much of that is, and I talked about this, I did another live, which was fear of exposure, which you can go to if you go to my YouTube or go to the main channel. So fear of exposure is like, we have to feel connected to the inner child, and the inner child has to feel protected, which means the deepest parts of us are able to be seen. The deepest parts of us are able to be seen, but also that part of us feels protected through boundaries, discernment, and anger, that the inner child is able to come to the forefront, right? So when it comes to like moving towards things that are very soul driven in our life, it's about, can the inner child be seen? Can the inner child be seen that much? The other piece, right, is that kind of connects to this is perfectionism and being a big vision idealist, right? So what does it mean to be a perfectionist, right? Being a perfectionist means that we have a fear of vulnerability and we have a fear of intimacy. So perfectionism is a fear of intimacy with the self. It's a fear of vulnerability, of, again, being seen, right? So being seen, not put together, right? And so much of, perfectionism, being this big vision idealist, like what happens is, we download this big vision and we're like, oh my God, like you see the end point of the vision. Like, for example, like when I get, because I'm a screenwriter and filmmaker. And so say I get an idea for a movie, I see something in my head and I know if I were to actually shoot that movie, it would not look like what I see in my head. It wouldn't even be close because I'm seeing this perfect image in my head. I'm seeing this perfect image in my head, and that perfect image can deter us from the process of actually creating what's in front of us. We can't actually take this linear action to the creation because what it is that we want to have everything sort of dialed together, right? We want to have this perfect image because we're like, oh shit, what if people see me, right? Again, it comes down to maybe I'm fundamentally flawed. I don't want to be seen. I don't want to be exposed, right? And so we kind of live in this big vision, idealism, this fantasy, this fairy tale, and we can never actually execute. And so much of that comes down to just your capacity to be seen, your intimacy with yourself. Like, how intimately are you connected to yourself? How intimately are you connected to your little boy, your little girl, right? And so much of this is worthiness, right? And so it's kind of, think about it like you have this big vision, and do you feel worthy, just who you are in your spirit, to have this sort of raw experience, right? So say you want to create this big creative project, right? That's really massive. But what if you distill whatever you're trying to create down to its simplest form, right? For example, I'll relate this, that I'm starting kind of this YouTube show, and I have this big vision for how I want I want this studio to look. I see it all in my head, but I know when I start, and it's launching later this fall, it's not going to be what I see in my head. And so I have to come down to, do I feel worthy to have value to offer when it's just me, my voice, and a microphone, right? There's no fucking fancy pictures behind me. I want this neon sign with the name of the podcast. Like, when we see those like really well-known famous comedians with their podcast, like the studio's like legit. And it's like, I see that and I won't have that when I start, right? And so now, even doing this with you guys right here, it's like, oh, I want to do YouTube lives, like, but you're starting off with like no followers and basically no one watching this. And can you still feel worthy through the intimacy that you have created within yourself? And the truth is, I feel worthy doing this. I feel good doing this. I feel so okay that I'm speaking to 3 people, maybe even no one. I feel so okay with that. And this is where your life changes, because, people, and this is what people are afraid of, that people will be like, oh, like Jamie's got no followers. Like what's he doing? Right. But then all of a sudden, 2 years later, you keep at it, 50,000 followers, you're making second income on your YouTube, shit's rolling, and people are like, oh, wow. And so, but in life, we can't endure that experience. I mean, it's like, can you do something and not be good at it? In order to get good at anything, you have to be bad at it. And sometimes that might mean being bad at something publicly, or not being perfect publicly, or trying to figure something out publicly. And that all comes down to the intimacy that you've carved and created with yourself. How connected and protected you feel in your own space, that you can reveal the work in progress, right? We're so afraid to not appear like we have our shit together. We're all works in progress. We're all works in progress. And perfectionism at the root is that we don't want to be viewed as someone who's a work in progress. We want to be, and think of like people even in the space that I'm in, spiritual teachers. Everyone wants to seem like the most authority figure who is an integrity in every single way, that we have our shit together in every single way, when really, everyone's just a flawed human being who has gifts, has talents, and areas that we struggle. And we need to be able to embrace this sort of messy humanity. And that's really where intimacy starts, is embracing sort of our messy humanity, that we don't need to be seen in a certain way. And so there's this level of just vulnerability, right? And like, okay, I feel worthy. distilling whatever I'm doing down to its bare minimum. So if you're someone who struggles to with this big vision and you get trapped up in big visions, and I'm someone I was a big vision person who struggled to execute on things. And one effective thing is, if you were to distill whatever it is that you're doing down to its purest form, what is it, right? And that's usually the only way we even know if we have something. If you were to distill something down to its purest form, what is it? Because we love to get trapped with the fluffy shit, the non-essentials. And really what that's doing is that it's pulling from, some element of not being worthy, right? Some element of not being worthy, right? So like, think about it. When I'm doing my podcast, when I think about, I got to have this perfect studio, I'm basically saying I want to look legitimate. Like, I don't want to look someone like all these other teachers have these perfect looking podcasts. I want to seem legitimate. When really, if I distill it down, is that people are going to be tuning in because they want to listen to me talk, because they feel that I have something to say that's of value, right? And so when it's just you and a microphone, can you extort your value from that? And that's what the value exchange is. And so when we got to be very careful to get tripped up into higher visions all the time, right? Because I was my whole life a daydreamer, and it was like, I go to the dream and I'm like, back to reality, Jamie, back to reality, back to reality. And this is also what happens relationally too with people. Essentially what we're doing is we're seeing this perfected image of the higher self, right? We're seeing the end product. And this is where things like imposter syndrome come. We procrastinate because we have imposter syndrome. What's really happening, you guys, is that the person that we see in that image, we're not that person yet. You're not that person yet. You're seeing a higher self vision of you that hasn't been cultivated and created internally. So you need to ask yourself, as who you are right now in space and time with the resources that you have, what can you do? What can you create? And when you actually very tangibly, practically, and realistically move from the reality of where you are and who you are, you engage in the process of becoming that person that you see in the higher vision. This is where people get so tripped up in life because they're like, I see this big vision. I see myself as this liberated person. But when it comes to waking up on a Tuesday and moving the needle forward, they get tripped up. They're like, they sit in front of the computer and they're like, oh shit, like I don't know where to start. And what's happening is they're trying to, like, on a Tuesday at 10 a.m., have that vision here. When you get that vision, you need to let that go really quickly. So my advice to people who struggle with procrastination, get the download of the vision and let it go. Let it go. Let it go. It's all about how you control your energy and a lot of your thinking, and being very mentally disciplined to be, I got that vision, that's great, but I need to come back to reality. And so that's where people really struggle, is because they're here as someone and they're like, I don't feel worthy of what you've created there. No shit, you don't feel worthy, because you're not that person yet. But you're going to create something right now that is going to be like an embryo of that vision. When I talk about distilling things down to their like inherent value, it's all about finding a nugget, right? It's all about finding a nugget or an embryo of something. And so, for example, this podcast, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to do it. I'm going to engage with it, and I'm going to find the embryo of something that I feel that works. And then you build momentum from that embryo. But you have to find that out through a space of action, through a space of doing. If you're equating everything to this end vision, your body's going to be paralyzed. You won't be able to move. You're going to feel like an imposter because you aren't that person. So you need to ask yourself, who am I right now, and what resources do I have? Okay, so this also relates to energy, right? So why do people procrastinate? Part of the reason why people procrastinate is because we have a lot of energy, right? So think about, you're someone who procrastinates. I have a lot of energy means I have a lot of gifts. I have a lot to offer. I'm good at this thing. I have so much. And so much of procrastination is rooted down to energetic grounding, right? So I teach in my work that energy enters through the crown and exits through our feet. So energy needs a point to enter and a point to exit. So being spiritually gifted means energy has an entry point and an exit point, and energy can move through us. And so when we struggle, someone like ADHD, things like this, it means that we're accessing a lot of energy, but the energy hasn't had anywhere to move. And so much of working through procrastination is learning how to ground and root our energy and feel more of our power and the energetic vibration of who we are in more of a grounded frequency, right? So much of it is somatic work of grounding your root chakra, grounding your lower chakras on earth. The reason why you're this big vision, idealistic person who can't execute intangible reality, procrastination, you're someone who has all these ideas, but you can't execute. It's from an energetic standpoint, it means the energy is up here and it can't come down, right? So what we want, if we think about someone who's creating shit that's like connected to the higher planes, it's connected to God, but it's also really tangible and really like living in reality and able to move. From an energetic standpoint, that person is grounded through their root and they're open through their crown. So in that space, we're able to access our potential and we're able to ground our potential. We're able to access our potential and ground our potential. A lot of times people struggle with procrastination because they have so much energy that's swirling, but there's nowhere for the energy to go. So from a nervous system standpoint, what this is going to create is just total overwhelm, right? You guys, the main reason why we procrastinate is because the system doesn't have capacity to execute. And I'm going to talk about why we don't have the capacity to execute. And I'm going to talk about early childhood and the energy as I did, that we don't have the capacity to execute. For one, we have access to a lot of energy, but we can't ground, right? So we're not very grounded, right? Which basically means that our root chakra is blocked. There's a barrier. We're not connected to our lower chakras, that we have a hard time bringing our energy down to earth, right? So, and that will lead to us being really dysregulated in our nervous system. We'll kind of be like an energy junkie in the sense that we'll be addicted to high volumes of energy, but this idea of grounding our energy is kind of off-putting because it moves us into more of a space of stillness and calm. And if we're someone who accesses a lot of energy, sometimes we have this identity that I'm a very energetic person, or I'm really animated and people like my energy. Like people like my energy. And if I bring it to the ground, that's going to dilute what people like, or the identity that that energy has created for me. People are not going to be drawn to me as much, right? And so again, people wear these sort of masks, these performative masks to extort value and worth. And if I bring my energy down, now I'm really just going to be in my own body. I'm going to be my own sort of energetic container. And people aren't going to want to be around me as much. I'm not going to bring as much value to people. And so sometimes we have a fear, or we're turned off to the idea of like when things are really calm, things are really peaceful. Think about when you're addicted to relationships with like highs and lows, a roller coaster. And we think, oh, healthy love is boring. Healthy love isn't boring. And I'm not going to talk about relationships, but healthy love is calm, right? It's a little more ease filled. It's not constantly like this. Yes, there are highs and lows to a relationship, but it's more of a regulated state. So much of procrastination really comes down to the rooting and the regulation of our nervous system. And so the type of procrastination that I'm really talking about here, you guys, is executing on things that really mean something to us. So this is the other piece, and I think is really important. So much of procrastination is learned through your resilience and self-reliance when you're a kid, when you're a child. For example, this imprint, and this is the imprint that I identified with, that I had to unwind and heal in my system, is being an underfunctioner, means you feel this, you're this under functioning human being that struggles to complete things. You can't execute. Most importantly, you struggle with resilience. So going back to what I said about David Goggins and limbic friction, what that really means is system resilience, that you're really resilient. So if you think about the ideal way to raise for a parent to establish resilience in a young kid would be to, you go off and explore and make your own mistakes, but it's a safe place to come back here and I will support you when you kind of come back. So think of like going off and kind of making some of your own mistakes, or like learning to struggle a little bit, but then also knowing that you're supported and finding that right balance. Because when we become too spoon-fed or too babied, or the parent is too enmeshed with us, we lack to develop resilience, right? We lack to develop resilience. And so the under-functioning model is someone who struggles with resilience. And that struggle with resilience is why an under-functioner hasn't been able to become a fully functioning human being in the world. And if we don't feel like we're a fully functioning human being in the world, think about the amount of shame that our body's going to hold. Think about what our self-image is going to be like. And so much of procrastination is related to what our self-image is, right? We have to shift how we relate to ourselves. And if we have this identity of being an under-functioner, which means we struggle with resilience, which means when limbic friction is really small, we come up to doing a challenging thing, right? Then we're like, ooh, this is really, really hard. We give up. Or maybe we had a parent that came in and did it for us. And so what that does is it builds up momentum and pattern that I don't complete things, I don't finish things. When the going gets tough, that I just keel over. We build a lot of fear in our body. We build a lot of resistance. And now the reward system in our life becomes instant gratification. Instant gratification because of the lack of resilience. When we come up to doing hard things, we keel over, we contract. Shadow comes up, self-sabotage comes up. And so and what this really means is our nervous system, the capacity in our system is really small. So when it comes to having to trust ourselves, having to navigate ourselves, having to figure out things for ourselves, when it actually comes to living in that space, which is kind of like doing something that you don't know how to do, but you have to figure it out. And you're kind of in the space of like, ooh, like I don't, but like you trust you'll figure it out. Being able to sit in that space and just trust your capacity to navigate and figure it out. And that essentially means like working on a project, you don't exactly know what the project's going to be. It's really hard and challenging. And you sit there and you just trust that you're going to figure it out. You trust you're going to figure it out. You're developing resilience. You're developing resilience. You're developing more limbic friction in your system, right? Say some people grow up in really like an obedient household, right? And they don't have procrastination when it comes to certain things, right? Things that maybe it doesn't mean a lot to them, but they know they do because they should, right? Think about people who did really well in school. A lot of people probably did well in school were people who built a lot of limbic friction with doing things that they should do because that was established in a very obedient household. But then for those types of people, the procrastination comes when it means to moving to things that are really soul driven, like pursuing a passion project. They're like, because they're afraid to be seen. And so procrastination can move in different areas. So an under-functioner, like where I come from, you're gonna procrastinate with everything, right? Because just your capacity to execute and to have any sort of resilience in your system is something you need to learn in adulthood. And so the way that I healed that, and it's still healing in me, still working on it, was expanding the capacity of my nervous system. So energetically moving energy through my body, so regulating my system, so emotionally I could purge and I can move all these stuck emotions in my body, which freed up space. And so for me, that built up this inherent capacity, right? And so for someone who comes from more of this obedient household, and when it comes to doing chores, they don't have any procrastination. Like, oh, you got to cut the lawn. Let's go, right? Someone under functions is like, oh, I don't want to cut the lawn. Maybe they had people who did it for them growing up. But someone who comes from the more obedient model, they're like, yeah, no problem. But then they're like, oh, build this business that you've been thinking about for 10 years, or like, oh shit, like I'm gonna do the things that I know that I'm good at, the areas that I've already built up the limbic friction for, right? So procrastination is this very wide range of things, because we can be like really good at doing certain things, things that don't really have personal meaning, things that we know that we have to do or that we should do or whatever. But then when it comes to doing really, really meaningful things, we procrastinate. And this procrastination is more what I'm talking about, which is really building up the capacity to take action on things that are really, really meaningful to us, right? Things that are really, really meaningful to us. You know, when you think about the big vision for your life, that business, that art, you know, whatever that might be, it's about your capacity to take action on those things. And that really is so much more about being seen, being exposed, because some people can have, again, coming back to, they don't procrastinate with things they have to do, but they're not going to be seen doing these things. They're not going to be exposed, right? It's not like they're having to express themselves or anything. So I'm talking about procrastination with like expression, being seen, exposure. But also the thing is that it carries over to other areas. So for example, if you don't have procrastination towards doing things that don't mean anything to you, that doesn't mean it carries over to being able to execute on things that are soul driven. But I'll tell you that building up the capacity and bandwidth to do really difficult things, to engage with the limbic process and resilience of doing things that mean a lot to you, that does carry over to like having to go cut the grass. And I know this from personal experience, that it just, you know, it relates to going to the gym. It relates to every aspect of taking action in life. And so procrastination, when you can move through procrastination with dreams and so things that are soul driving you, it carries over to other areas of your life as well, where you really, really develop a sense of resilience and a delayed reward system. There's nothing better than delayed gratification, having a delayed reward system, and it really builds up momentum. This is one of the biggest things that heals things like addiction, that heals shame, that heals guilt, that improves our self-image. When you really learn the payoff of what happens when things don't pay off immediately, that's where your life shifts. That's where you look at your life 3 or 4 years from now and you're like, holy shit, things have drastically shifted. And you have this deeper sense of fulfillment. And now when it comes to more of those micro pleasures, your relationship changes. You know, if you're someone, for example, say you smoke weed every night, but you engage in this process of delayed reward system of learning to not procrastinate on things to do with your dreams, I bet you more than anything, it's not like maybe you won't stop smoking weed, but the charge around the need to smoke weed will be drastically less significant. And the same with any sort of vice that we have, because we're going to be in this delayed reward system where our self-image is so improved, and the sense of fulfillment and connection and embodied feeling of ease and wholeness in our body is going to be so much greater, that the charge towards those things, we're going to see the self-sabotage in them. We're going to see how these are little breaks in my power, right? So what's going to happen is you really engage in a delayed reward system. You're really going to, the sabotage mechanisms and the ways that your power gets cut off is going to be seen. You're going to see how when you say you're going to do something and you don't do it, the impact that has. You're going to see that when you procrastinate on something and don't execute, you're going to see the impact that has on you. When you've existed in that reward system of delayed rewards, you see everything from like this higher vision, and you're like, holy shit, I see how that was a sabotage pattern, or I see how that was a fear of my power. And you take accountability for why you've been stuck in your life. You take accountability for, oh, that's why things haven't really changed. I haven't really actually been working that hard, or I haven't really been applying to the right things, right? And so And so often people's energy is so scattered. From an energetic standpoint, so much of procrastination is about, I call it narrow and deep focus, right? Think about the amount of times like people do work, but they're not doing deep work, meaning they're avoiding the work that's really going to change their life. They're doing the external sort of non-essential curricular things, but they don't go to the core of what could change their life. And so much of that, again, is back to the energetic swirls versus energetic grounding. When you really root your energy and you learn how your energy moves and how you conduct and create energy in your field, then you really, really learn the impact of narrow and deep focus, which means less things and you go deeper with the things that you're doing. Because you can feel when someone's energy is really scattered, you can really, really feel it. And it feels really thin. It doesn't feel like depth and it doesn't feel profound. If you want to move towards things that are profound, it's going to be about narrow and deep. It doesn't mean like only do one thing, like maybe it's 2 or 3 things, but the energy's got to be deeper and bigger and more directed. When you do that, the execution, the creation is going to be that much more potent and powerful rather than like a little sprinkling, There was one more thing that I wanted to talk about here, you guys, just this idea of procrastination. I was talking about, so delayed reward system, all of a sudden your life is shifting. You're recognizing all the ways that you self-sabotaged. One really big piece, and this is a higher piece vision that I'm going to bring forward here. I call this ancestral polarity. So why do we procrastinate? And this is at an ancestral trauma level. And this is something people don't think about. Think about you're a guy. You're a masculine dude. You have a lot of masculine power. And you procrastinate on doing things in your life. And this is real big picture, guys, real higher vision. And you procrastinate on doing things in your life that are really going to change things for you. What might be the case is that at an ancestral level, the men in your family had contracted and conceded and taken away the power of women. And so now the women in your lineage have a real distrust of the masculine, have a real sort of archetype and imprint that the masculine, when the masculine is in their power, they can't be trusted. When the masculine is in their power, they are dangerous. When the masculine is in their power, they hurt women. When the masculine is in their power, they can't liberate women, and they steal their power, and they whatever it might be. And so when it comes to, say, you're this masculine guy who's wanting to like build a kingdom, this idea of your feminine ancestors are like, because they have this association that with you going to your power, the same thing's going to happen. And this plays out in the ancestral field, right? The ancestral field is how the left side of your body communicates with the right side. And this happens here at an ancestral level. So some ways that we procrastinate, moving towards building a kingdom, creating the vision that we want, moving towards our highest power. And in order to move to your highest power, you have to stop procrastinating. You have to take massive, massive action. This is why this is related. And so you being in your power, you being in your radiance, you being in your light, you being a man who gets shit done and executes and fucking moves fully into your power, the women in your lineage are afraid. And so now this is an ancestral healing component, which I call ancestral polarity, where you need to rectify this experience. This is a lot of the work that I do, part of the work that I do, to be able to resurrect and course correct the experience between the lineage, so women the lineage can actually trust you. Trust that you're going to create something that is different, that trust the kingdom of masculine energy that you're going to create is not going to be the same sort of karmic pattern that has existed for centuries in the lineage. And so you have to give them positive somatic evidence that what you're doing and what you're creating is going to be a brand new imprint of a healthy, integrated masculine energy. Now what happens, because so much of procrastination at an energetic trauma level is actually that the ancestors of origin and the family of origin is sabotaging for us. that the ancestors are doing what they need to do. And like, think about, you're trying to do a big project, but you feel all this like your back is seizing up. When the idea of doing something, your back is seizing up. So now you've moved into this like massive ancestral trauma response, because the idea of taking action towards this thing, the ancestors don't have enough somatic evidence to trust you. And so now, as you feel the impact of the ancestors in your space, you're like, my back's seized up, you're paralyzed in fear, your system is shut down, you can't take action. And so much of moving out of procrastination is actually clearing the ancestral field, getting the ancestors to trust you, breaking up with your ancestors, breaking up with the ancestors of origin, and breaking up with the family of origin, the mother wound, the father wound, removing enough of these energetic imprints so that you can take action to what means something to you. Because we struggle with procrastination because how would my mom feel if I was in my power? How would my dad feel if I was in my power? How would the ancestors respond? And those imprints show up as holdings in the tissue, as emotional holdings, all these different uncomfortable symptoms that when it comes to maybe up-leveling or pursuing something or taking a big leap, that we move into like a freeze response. And so I think the appropriate thing to, you guys, leave this off on is, so much of procrastination is going to be about getting to in the system to a place where things are really, really moving, right? So if we're in like an immobilized state, or we're in like a fawn or a freeze response, we're not going to be able to move forward in our life. Procrastination is going to be the reflection of a stuck nervous system. And so we want to really get to a place where things are able to move energetically and emotionally. And when things are moving internally, that's going to be able to be more reflected externally. The internal and the external are always sort of fueling off of one another. And so when we are really shut down or frozen internally, of course, we're not going to take action externally. Of course, we're going to like look at the cursor on our screen and we're like, I'm not going to do that, because we feel stuck, right? So we have this experience that things are stuck. And now that brings on the mental state of hopelessness, eventually depression, anxiety. We have all these recurring sort of negative thoughts and thought patterns, all these different things. But when things are moving in our system, when we feel things are moving internally, we're going to feel more hopeful. We're going to feel more, there's more possibilities. And so we're going to be able to hold more of the capacity for creation. We're going to be able to hold more of the capacity for execution because of the possibilities that have been cultivated within our system. And so much, you guys, of procrastination is capacity in the nervous system, capacity to be seen, capacity for exposure, building a delayed reward system, which is really building a sense of resilience, doing things you're not good at, doing things that are hard, doing things that you don't know the answers right away, doing things that, you have to kind of struggle and squirm a little bit to figure out what it is. That's where the resilience in the system is created, to build this sort of self-reliance and self-trust that you can figure it out in the unknown. So really building this capacity in your system, to build this capacity for intimacy, to build this capacity to being seen, for exposure, to build this capacity for energy to move through your body, for energy to come down and to exit, to have an entry point to exit, to be able to really move and execute from that energy. The reason why we spread ourselves thin, the reason why we try to do so many things, is because we don't feel worthy and we're too afraid to double down on ourselves. Because if we have to be really specific about who we are and what we're creating and what we're doing, then it would mean we're doubling down on ourselves. It would mean we're saying, I'm worthy, so I'm going to set myself up to succeed. And we spread ourselves so thin, it's a way we cop out and self-sabotage that I'm going to try to mitigate the possibility of failure, or also mitigate the possibility of success. And so much of really being able to execute on our energy is this idea of, we're doubling down on ourselves, that I feel worthy. I feel someone with this self-image that I view as worthy. And so we have to really, really develop that capacity in the system. And so again, guys, just to reiterate, this type of procrastination, I'm talking about procrastinating on things that are really, really meaningful to you, things that are soul driven, right? Things that are soul driven. So when we're like an under functioner in the home, we probably just struggle across the board with procrastination. And that means because when it comes up to the space that we don't know where we're doing, we freak out, right? We're like, there's too much fear. There's too much shame. There's not enough capacity in our system. There's not enough capacity in our system. Say we're someone who grew up obedient, doing all the things we had to do. We're going to have procrastination when it comes to doing something that it requires our expression, that really requires us to be seen and put ourselves out there. We're probably going to be this perfectionist that, you know, we have to look a certain way, look like we have to have it all together. Biggest thing with procrastination from a trauma perspective is the capacity of the nervous system. That's the number one thing. And so the final thing, you guys, that I'll say, and I really mean it this time, the reason why we procrastinate is because we're not actually ready for what we're creating. We're not actually ready for what we're creating at a nervous system level. We're not actually ready for what we're creating at a capacity level. There is this organic unfolding of procrastinating where sometimes we're procrastinating because we're not actually ready for the vision. And we'll actually know that when we're actually taking action at a system level, we're actually ready for the specific actions that we're taking, right? So say it comes to doing, and this is a very nuanced thing, but this is from a real trauma perspective. We have to think about the organic unfolding of, you know, perhaps we're procrastinating and experiencing so much resistance because we're not actually ready for the creation of that thing. That there's more emotional, energetic movement that needs to happen more internally, more regulation in our system, more capacity that has to be cultivated so that we can execute on the vision. Because, you know, what's going to happen, and our body's always perceiving threats. It's always, would I be able to hold the result of that creation, right? So from a real sort of holistic, energetic, spiritual integrity place, sometimes we procrastinate because not procrastinating on that thing would result in something that we're not yet ready to hold or receive. I really want that just to settle in with you guys, that sometimes we procrastinate because from a spiritual higher level, a godly level, we're not ready for it yet. And that things need to unfold for that to take place. And sometimes we just have to trust that unfolding, that unwinding of our system, and that's really being, you guys, that's really, really being forthright and honest with yourself about what your current capacity is. Where is my capacity currently, and what do I actually have available? The question to ask yourself is, what's available to me right now? It's a question I'm always asking myself, what's available to me? And we want to exist in the space of challenge meets availability. What's available to me, but is also going to challenge me a little bit. That's where limbic friction is created, and that's where delayed gratification is manifested. When what's available to me and what's going to challenge me, that's a very trauma-informed look at execution and taking action and finding the right balance of availability and challenge. What's available to my system, right? So for example, it could be having a hard conversation and you're like, I know that needs to happen at some point, but it's not quite available to me, right? And so a little bit more capacity needs to unfold and unwind in the system to be available for that place. And the procrastination, the resistance could be procrastination, right? It could be that we fear the outcome, or we're just having resistance for resistance sake, right? But it also might be because it's not available to us yet. And from a really trauma perspective, it's important to take that into consideration. We don't want to go down the path of being like, oh, it's not available to me, I'm not going to do it. And then we never challenge ourselves. And for example, me as a practitioner, I'm always finding that balance with clients Where can I tell a client's not ready for something, it's not available to them, and where do I need to challenge? And so I'm always most effective when I'm taking into account their current capacity and taking into account also challenging them and moving them forward in certain ways and finding that bridge point, that pivot point. And when we find that in our own life, that's where our self-image is going to improve. That's where we're really going to grow. And we're really going to grow in a way that is nurturing and actually gentle to our system. And we're actually going to heal our relationship to struggling to complete things, to taking inaction, to procrastinating from a very nurturing, loving, gentle, trauma-informed, energetic perspective and component. And we're really able to honor ourselves. So we challenge ourselves. And that's for masculine, feminine energy. We're challenging ourselves, calling ourselves forward. And we're also being loving and kind to our current capacity and where we're at. And so I'm going to leave it at that, guys. But procrastination is all about the capacity of the system. And so when we struggle with procrastination, it's because of a lack of capacity. It's because of a lack of capacity, and that relates to capacity in the system for all the different things that we went through, which is obviously like a large volume of different things. Robin W., this feels like it's about right time. There's a timeline to do things. The energy tells me when to move. If I'm hitting the brakes, it's taxing to the system, out of integrity. Do I feel worthy enough to not do it perfectly? Exactly. So much of just trusting the energy, right? Just trusting the energy and trusting what's available to you. And, because sometimes we go through periods where it's not about producing anything, right? It's about a lack of action, because it's more actually about rest. It's more about healing. It's more like it's maybe more of an internal process that we're having to do, right? And then some seasons it's like, I'm very much in this season of just external action. And I'm aware of that. So I'm hitting the gas, right? I've done so much internal movement, and now it's like, let's go, move. So it's all about the delayed gratification, the limbic friction. That's very much the season that I'm in. And so just being very honest with yourself and just knowing kind of where you're at in your own individual process and what's available to you. And that takes the pressure off, because so much of procrastination is a self-induced pressure cooker that builds momentum, builds internal aggression and frustration, that further stagnates us. Because when we internally are aggressive to ourselves, when we attack ourselves, when we move into the space of this like self-loathing, that builds momentum, and it further exasperates our stagnation and our stuckness, which paralyzes the system even more. So we need to be gentle with ourselves. Thank you, everybody, for watching this, whether you watch this live or you're watching the replay. The trauma of procrastination. This is a big topic, and I really, really enjoy this topic, and it's really relatable to me in my life right now. So hopefully you guys connect with this and in some way or pulled some part of this. So I would love if you guys were able to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It would mean a lot. We're going to be doing these regularly. You're so welcome, Robin. Thank you for being here and tuning in. So much appreciated from my end. Sending love to everyone, and hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you soon.